The patrol car slid to a stop so fast the tires screamed. Red and blue lights spilled across the quiet street, painting the neat row of houses in frantic color. Neighbors stood frozen on their porches, robes half-tied, phones glowing in their hands. At the center of it all sat a modest two-story home with white siding and trimmed hedges. Clean, ordinary, forgettable. The kind of place people passed every day without a second glance. Inside, the air was wrong. Detective Mara Ellison felt at the moment she stepped through the front door. Not fear exactly, something heavier. The house smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet, like someone had scrubbed too hard and too late. Furniture sat in careful order, photos aligned perfectly on the walls. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked broken. And yet, someone had called 911 in a whisper and hung up. The dispatcher replayed the audio on the drive over. A woman's voice, shaky but controlled. "I don't have much time," she said. "If you're listening, please tell them to check the basement." Then the line went dead. Mara moved room to room with her partner, Detective Lucas Grant, scanning for signs of struggle. The kitchen counters gleamed. The sink was empty. A half-cold mug of coffee sat on a coaster, untouched. Upstairs, the bedrooms were immaculate. The guest room bed was made so tightly it looked unused. "Feels staged," Lucas muttered. Mara nodded. Staged or curated? The homeowner, Daniel Hargreave, waited on the front lawn with 2 officers. 42. Accountant. Married, according to the file. His hands shook, but his voice stayed steady as he answered questions. He said he'd been asleep when police arrived. Said his wife, Emily, was visiting her sister 2 towns over. Said he had no idea who would call 911 from his house. "Do you have a basement?" Mara asked. Daniel blinked once. "Yes." "Locked?" "No," he said quickly. "Why would it be locked?" Mara watched his jaw tighten after the words left his mouth. A fraction of a second, long enough to notice. They went back inside. The basement door sat at the end of a narrow hallway, painted the same white as the walls. Ordinary. Forgettable. There were no scuff marks around the handle, no damage to the frame. Just a small, brushed metal knob, cool to the touch. Mara turned it. Locked. She exchanged a look with Lucas. "You said it wasn't." Daniel's voice carried from the lawn. I must have misremembered." Lucas radioed for a locksmith. As they waited, Mara studied the door. No scratches. No prime marks. Someone hadn't forced it. Someone had secured it carefully. While they waited, a uniformed officer returned from canvassing the neighbors. "Ma'am, we got something," he said. "Across the street. Mrs. Keller says she heard noises last night. Thumping. Like furniture being moved. She thought it was renovations." "What time?" Mara asked. "Between midnight and 2. Daniel's alibi put him home at that time." The locksmith arrived, tools clinking softly in the quiet hall. It took less than a minute. The lock clicked open with a small, final sound that echoed more than it should have. Mara opened the door. The stairs descended into darkness. The light switch at the top didn't work. Lucas flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through dust-heavy air. The smell hit them next, damp concrete, metal, and something sour beneath it all. They went down slowly. The basement wasn't finished. Bare walls, exposed beams, shelving lined one side, stacked with neatly labeled boxes. Holiday decorations. Old clothes. On the far wall stood a heavy workbench, wiped clean, tools arranged with unsettling precision. And in the center of the room, bolted to the concrete floor, was a metal ring. Mara felt her stomach drop. Lucas crouched, running a gloved hand along the floor. "Scratches," he said quietly. "Fresh." A second ring sat a few feet away. Then a third. This wasn't storage. This was preparation. They heard shouting upstairs, raised voices, quick footsteps. A uniformed officer called down, "Detectives? You need to come up here." Now, outside, Daniel Hargreave was no longer standing calmly on the lawn. He was yelling that this was a misunderstanding, that the police were overreacting. When Mara stepped into view, he stopped mid-sentence. "What's in the basement, Daniel?" she asked. "Nothing," he said too fast. "Just junk." Mara held his gaze. "Where's your wife?" "At her sister's," he said again. Mara gestured to an officer. "Call the sister." The answer came back in less than a minute. Emily Hargreave had never arrived. She hadn't been expected. The crowd of neighbors grew quieter as the truth settled in. Someone started crying. A woman whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel's shoulders sagged. For a moment, it looked like he might say something, anything. Then he bolted. He didn't get far. They took him down on the sidewalk, cuffs snapping closed as he thrashed and shouted about mistakes, about privacy, about rights. Mara watched his face as the fight drained out of him, leaving something colder behind. Back inside, crime scene techs flooded the basement. Luminol revealed streaks across the concrete, invisible to the naked eye. A drain in the floor tested positive for human blood. More than one person's. Still no bodies. Mara stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the metal rings, trying to picture what had happened there. Trying not to. A tech called out from behind the shelves. "Detective, there's a false wall back here." Lucas helped pull the shelving aside. Behind it was a narrow door, nearly hidden, its edges sealed and painted to match the concrete. The tech swallowed. "It's locked from the outside." Mara reached for the handle. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she turned it. And as the hidden door began to open, revealing what Daniel Hargreave had gone to such lengths to conceal, Mara realized the basement wasn't the worst part of the house. It was only the beginning. The hidden door opened with a slow, reluctant creak, as if the house itself were resisting the truth. Lucas swung his flashlight forward, and the beam revealed a narrow stairwell descending even deeper underground. The air that drifted up was stale and warm, carrying the unmistakable smell of human presence, sweat, fear, and time trapped in darkness. "This wasn't on the blueprints," Lucas said quietly. "No," Mara replied. "It never is." They moved down step by step, boots echoing against unfinished concrete. The walls were close, closing in, forcing them into single file. Halfway down, Mara noticed scratches gouged into the paint. Long, frantic marks made by fingernails. Someone had tried to climb out. Someone had failed. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a low-ceilinged room lit by a single bare bulb. It flickered as if struggling to stay alive. Against one wall sat a stained mattress, thin and sunken in the middle. Chains lay coiled beside it, attached to the same kind of metal rings they'd seen upstairs. A plastic bucket stood in the corner. Empty food wrappers littered the floor. "This is a holding room," Lucas said. "Not storage. Not temporary." A holding room meant something else came next. Mara's radio crackled. "Detective Ellison, you need to see this," a text said from upstairs. "We ran the vehicle in the garage." The garage had been overlooked in a rush. It was clean, too clean, the concrete recently power washed. Daniel's SUV sat parked neatly inside, keys already bagged. Inside the trunk, they found traces of blood, small amounts, wiped down but not erased. Fibers, hair, and duct tape. Back in the hidden room, another tech crouched near the far wall. "There's more," she said, pressing on a panel that shifted inward. A second false wall slid aside, revealing a cramped corridor lined with doors. 3 of them, all metal, all locked. Mara felt her chest tighten. "Open them." The first door revealed a room no larger than a walk-in closet. The walls were padded, stained in places that told their own story. The second room was worse. Restraints mounted to the wall, a camera in the corner pointed downward, its red light dark but recently unplugged. The third door was empty. Too empty. "No bodies," Lucas said. "Not here," which meant they had been moved. Upstairs, officers searched Daniel's home office. What they found shifted the case from disturbing to catastrophic. Hidden inside a filing cabinet were burner phones, 6 of them, all powered off. A laptop wiped clean, except for one folder that forensic techs managed to recover fragments from. Names, dates, locations, some marked with a check, others circled in red. Mara stared at the list as it came up on the screen. These weren't random scribbles. They were schedules, movements, patterns, victims. "Cross-reference missing persons," she said. "Local first, then statewide." Within an hour, the hits began coming in. A college student reported missing 2 years earlier. A runaway no one had followed up on. A single mother whose disappearance had been chalked up to relocation. A tourist who never returned from a weekend trip. All had passed through this town. All had vanished quietly. Daniel Hargreaves sat in an interrogation room downtown, hands folded neatly on the table. He asked for a lawyer, then changed his mind. Then asked again. When Mara finally sat across from him, he looked almost relieved to see her. "You're making this worse than it is," he said softly. Mara didn't respond. "They came to me," Daniel continued. "They needed help. I gave him shelter." "Shelter with chains?" Mara asked. His mouth twitched. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Daniel leaned forward. Emily understood. Mara felt the room tilt. "Where is she?" Daniel smiled, just barely. "Safe." The smile vanished when Mara slid a photo across the table. A still image pulled from a traffic camera 2 counties over. Daniel's SUV, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. The trunk clearly weighted down. "You move them," Mara said. "All of them." "Where?" Daniel's eyes flicked to the door, then back. "You're already too late." The interrogation ended there. While Daniel was processed, a call came in from a rural deputy an hour outside town. A landowner had reported suspicious digging near an abandoned storm shelter on his property. The coordinates lined up with one of the circled locations on Daniel's list. Mara and Lucas arrived as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the field. The shelter door stood ajar, rusted hinges groaning in the wind. Inside, the smell hit them immediately. They found 3 bodies, all female, all wrapped in plastic, all bearing marks that matched the restraints in Daniel's basement. One of them was Emily Hargreave. Mara stood outside afterward, breathing in the cool air, trying to steady herself. Lucas handed her a bottle of water she didn't realize she needed. "That empty room," he said. "There were more spaces than bodies." Mara nodded. He didn't work alone. The evidence supported it. Financial records showed unexplained deposits. Burner phone data hinted at frequent contact with unknown numbers. And the laptop, despite being wiped, contained fragments of messages referencing deliveries and transfers. Someone had helped him move victims. Someone had helped him hide them. That night, as Daniel was transferred to county jail, a corrections officer noticed something odd. Daniel wasn't resisting. He wasn't speaking. He was smiling again. At 2:46 a.m., the jail lost power for exactly 90 seconds. When the lights came back on, Daniel Hargreaves' cell was empty. No broken locks. No alarms triggered. Just an open door. And on the concrete floor, written in something dark and wet, were 4 words that made Mara's blood run cold when she saw the photo minutes later. "You found the wrong house." By the time dawn broke, the case had already outgrown the town. State investigators flooded in. Federal agencies circled. News vans lined the street outside the Hargreave house, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like antennae searching for answers. Inside the command center, maps covered the walls, photos, timelines, red string connecting locations Daniel Hargreave had touched. And everywhere, the same question echoed. How does a man vanish from a locked jail cell without help? Mara Ellison hadn't slept. She stood over a conference table, staring at a grainy still frame pulled from the jail's backup cameras. 90 seconds of darkness. When the power returned, the corridor cameras flickered back to life. Empty. No guards out of place. No doors forced. No alarms tripped. "It wasn't a jailbreak," Lucas said, voice hoarse. "It was a handoff." Mara nodded. "He was moved, and whoever did it knew the exact window." They traced it backward. The power company confirmed the outage wasn't accidental. A targeted surge hit a transformer 2 blocks from the jail. Professional. Temporary. Clean. Someone had practiced this. Forensics cracked one of the burner phones late that morning. A partial message recovered from corrupted memory surfaced on the screen. "Basement compromised. Use the other door." The other door. Mara felt the click in her chest as pieces aligned. "Pull the property records," she said. "Every permit, every inspection, every adjacent structure." It took hours, but when it hit hard. A forgotten easement ran beneath the Hargreave property, an old utility corridor decommissioned decades earlier, sealed on paper but never fully collapsed. The hidden stairwell in the basement hadn't led only downward. It had led sideways. They returned to the house with engineers and ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the holding rooms, beneath the false walls and metal doors, the scanner lit up with voids, long, narrow passages extending under neighboring lots, curving toward the woods behind the development. Daniel didn't build a dungeon, Lucas said quietly. He inherited one. The dig revealed a concealed hatch beneath the third metal door, the one that had been empty. It opened into a reinforced tunnel, tall enough to stand in, lined with old concrete and newer steel supports. Tire marks scored the floor. Fresh. They followed it. The tunnel ended at a rusted service building half a mile into the woods, disguised by brush and neglect. Inside, they found a temporary command point, folding tables, maps, fuel cans, and a medical kit stocked with sedatives and 4 bags. It wasn't a lone predator's hideout. It was infrastructure, a network. DNA from the storm shelter bodies matched several unsolved disappearances across 2 states. Patterns emerged: vulnerable women, transient routines, clean breaks. But the logistics, transport, storage, silence pointed to more than one set of hands. Someone handled money. Someone handled movement. Someone handled cleanup. And someone handled exits. A break came from an unexpected place. A financial crimes analyst flagged a shell company tied to property maintenance. Small invoices, consistent payments, routed through offshore accounts. One name surfaced repeatedly as a subcontractor: Keller Services. Mrs. Keller, the neighbor across the street. Mara's pulse quickened as she replayed the canvas notes from the first night. Heard thumping. Thought it was renovations. Keller Services specialized in after-hours structural work. Quiet work. They brought Mrs. Keller in that afternoon. 63. Retired. Soft-spoken. She brought cookies, apologized for the trouble, said she was happy to help. She denied everything until Mara slid the evidence across the table. Bank records, tunnel access logs recovered from a hidden keypad, and a single photograph. Mrs. Keller's car parked at the service building at 3:41 a.m., the same night Daniel moved the bodies. The woman's shoulders sagged. It was supposed to be temporary, she said. He said he was helping them, getting them back on their feet. I handled the logistics. That's all. Handled, Mara repeated. What happened when they wanted to leave? Mrs. Keller closed her eyes. That wasn't my part. She gave them the rest. There were others, 2 men who specialized in transport, a contractor who reinforced the tunnels, a fixer who erased digital trails. They operated quietly, efficiently, and for years. Daniel Hargreave was the face, the one who made it look like a single house horror. The truth was colder, a distributed system that thrived on normalcy. They found Daniel that night. Not in the woods. Not across the border. He was exactly where he'd promised to be. Inside another house that looked just like his own. Same floor plan. Same white siding. Same basement door at the end of a narrow hall. The homeowner, a recent widower, had been approached months earlier with an offer to sell structural access rights beneath his property. He'd declined. Then he'd stopped answering calls. When the tactical team breached, they found Daniel standing in the basement, hands raised, calm as ever. The tunnel behind him was open, ready. You won't stop it, Daniel said as they cuffed him. You'll just move it. The trials that followed were exhaustive and brutal. Names fell. Accounts froze. Tunnels collapsed under court order. Families learned the truth in fragments, then floods. Mrs. Keller pled guilty and testified. The transporters vanished, then surfaced one by one. Daniel was convicted on every count that mattered. They thought it was finished. 3 months later, a construction crew broke ground for a new development 2 towns over. The scanner chirped. A void appeared where no void should be. Workers uncovered a sealed corridor. Old concrete, newer steel. At the end of it was a door, locked from the outside. Mara stood at the site as the sun dipped low, the familiar blue of emergency lights washing over another ordinary street. She watched the door come down and felt the same weight settle in her chest. Networks don't die quietly. They adapt. And somewhere in a house that looks just like yours, there's always another door waiting to be opened. If this story pulled you in, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming.